The Egyptians didn't just practice medicine, they wrote it down. This is genuinely enormous, because oral tradition passed through shamans is not exactly a reliable medical curriculum. Memories fade, shamans die, and the instructions for what leaf cures, what fever disappear with them. But the Egyptians had papyrus, and they had things to say. Around 2700 BCE, a man named Imhotep, became the first named doctor in recorded history. After his death, the Egyptians didn't just honor him, they turned him into an actual god of healing, with temples built in his name. Now try to picture your current GP being so good at their job that after they retire, an organized religion forms around their memory. You can't. You've been on hold for 45 minutes. Egypt left behind roughly 10 surviving medical papyri. The most scientifically remarkable is the Edwin Smith Papyrus, written around 1600 BCE. It describes 48 surgical cases, mostly trauma, broken bones, dislocations, deep wounds, skull fractures. One case title reads, "Practices for a gaping wound in his head, which has penetrated to the bone and split the skull." And unlike almost every other medical text from this era, it contains almost no magical thinking, no incantations, no demon eviction, just systematic examination, diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis. It also contains the first use of the word brain in any language in all of recorded history. An Egyptian physician, thousands of years before neuroscience existed as a concept, observed the folded, pulsing surface of an exposed human brain and described it in enough clinical detail that modern surgeons still read it with recognition. The papyrus also gave the world's first formal triage system. 3 categories of prognosis: an ailment I will treat, an ailment with which I will contend, and, for hopeless cases, an ailment not to be treated. The world's earliest, don't even try to save this patient. Now, the other famous document is the Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE. It covers nearly 900 remedies and prescriptions across almost every known condition. It contains recipes using hippopotamus fat, crocodile fat, snake fat, and ibex fat. The ancient Egyptians apparently were also stressed about going bald. One of the recommended treatments involves a burned mouse, ground up and mixed with oil, applied directly to the scalp. That's right, the cure for baldness was to rub a mouse on your head. Meanwhile, modern men spend 90 pounds on a bottle of minoxidil and describe it as a breakthrough. Ebers Papyrus also gives us what is the single greatest job title in the history of human civilization. Because ancient Egypt had medical specialists responsible for individual body parts. Each physician was a healer of one disease and no more. Egypt essentially invented specialization. And one of those specialists, the proctological specialist, held the official Egyptian title of the Eri. Their job description, the shepherd of the anus. Egyptians were practicing specialized organ-specific medicine 5,000 years ago, and they were naming their specialists poetically. Now, here is where mummification becomes accidentally brilliant. The practice of opening bodies and carefully removing and preserving their organs made Egyptian physicians more familiar with human anatomy than almost any culture of their era. Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt, between 320 and 30 BCE, allowed to permit Greek physicians to conduct something unprecedented in the ancient world: systematic dissection of human cadavers. And here is where it gets dark, in a completely different way. Several centuries later, mummies inspired a medical treatment so spectacularly unhinged that it almost defies description. Powdered mummy, sold and consumed as medicine. An Alexandrian practitioner first described treating patients with it. By the 14th century, it was being used by Guy de Chauliac, the personal surgeon to Pope Clement VI. And by the early 16th century, it was so fashionable that Francois I of France, the King of France, personally carried a small pouch of powdered mummy mixed with rhubarb wherever he went. And we think we're embarrassed about the contents of our medicine cabinets. The practice remained in use until the early 1600s. And then something better came along. Greece, the 5th century BCE. And one of the most confidently wrong ideas in history. Hippocrates, the man called the father of medicine, did something genuinely revolutionary. He looked at sick people and said, "I don't believe a God caused this. There is a physical, observable, natural cause. Let's find it through careful observation of the patient." That is the foundation of scientific medicine. That is the moment the field began. The problem was the theory he landed on. Hippocrates proposed that the human body was governed by 4 substances, the 4 humors, and that health was simply a matter of keeping them in balance. Too much or too little of any one of them, and disease followed. The 4 humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much blood, you're sanguine. Flushed, cheerful, loud. Treatment, drain some blood. Too much phlegm, phlegmatic, pale, cold, sluggish. Treatment, warm the body and purge the phlegm. Too much yellow bile, choleric, hot-tempered, aggressive, irritable. Treatment, induce vomiting. Too much black bile, melancholic, dark, withdrawn, depressive. Treatment, also vomiting, and possibly more bleeding. The medical answer to almost every condition, in some form, was less of you. To be fair, Hippocrates wasn't entirely wrong. His emphasis on diet, rest, environment, and clinical observation was genuinely ahead of his time. His ethical framework, the Hippocratic Oath, still echoes through medicine today. But humoral theory, that specific, deeply incorrect idea, was about to become the unshakable foundation of Western medicine for the next 1,500 years. Because a Roman physician named Galen got hold of it, expanded it with tremendous authority and prolific writing, and the world decided he had sorted everything out. Galen was extraordinary in many ways. He advanced the understanding of the nervous system. He conducted careful anatomical research. He was also doing all of his anatomical work on Barbary apes and pigs, not humans, animals, and then confidently publishing the results as human anatomy. This will matter enormously in the next chapter. In 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire collapsed, and European medicine collectively hit undo. The accumulated knowledge of Greek and Roman physicians didn't vanish entirely. Monasteries preserved the texts, and monks provided basic health care to their communities. But the dominant medical philosophy of medieval Europe was that illness is divine punishment. Prayer is the first line of treatment. If prayer hasn't worked, you're probably still being punished. But we could also try bleeding, bloodletting, humoral theory's most devoted and most catastrophic clinical application. If you have too much of one humor, reduce it. It's simple, it's clean, it's a solution. It was also killing people. For fever, bleed the patient. For a headache, bleed the patient. For infection, bleed the patient. For the plague itself, which was ravaging Europe in waves from the 14th century, the prescribed treatment included significant bloodletting by physicians who were certain they were helping. George Washington died in 1799 with a throat infection. Over the course of a single day, his physicians bled him of roughly half his total blood volume. He might have survived the infection. He almost certainly did not survive the treatment. Bloodletting remained mainstream medicine until the mid-19th century. The next time someone claims that modern medicine is broken, remind them that the alternative was a barber with a bowl. Now, while Europe was bleeding its patients methodically toward death, the Islamic world was having a completely different experience. In Baghdad, Cairo, and Persia, scholars were not just preserving the medical works of Hippocrates and Galen. They were interrogating them, translating them, and building on them with original research. Avicenna produced the Canon of Medicine in the early 11th century, a systematic, 5-volume compendium of medical knowledge that became the standard textbook in Islamic universities and within decades in European ones too. For the next 600 years, medical students in Paris and Bologna were trained on a book written in Persia. Islamic physicians also introduced the concept of quarantine for infectious disease. They built hospitals that separated patients by condition. They advanced pharmacology, surgical technique, and wound management. They were conducting evidence-based medicine centuries before Europe remembered what evidence was. And then the Black Death arrived, 1347, bubonic plague carried by fleas on rats, reaching Europe through Sicilian ports and then spreading with a speed and lethality that still staggers the imagination. Within 5 years, between a third and a half of the entire European population was dead. The medical establishment sent in the plague doctors. The plague doctor is one of the most visually distinctive and deeply unsettling figures in the history of medicine. Long waxed coat, wide-brimmed hat, a long hollow beak packed tightly with aromatic herbs, flowers, and spices, lavender, mint, camphor, pointing out from the face like something from a nightmare. The logic was miasma theory, disease spread through corrupted, foul-smelling air. If the doctor smelled only herbs and flowers, they would be protected. They were not protected. They were dying in vast numbers alongside their patients. But the outfit persisted because no one had a better explanation. The beak was all they had. Then in 1543, a young Belgian anatomist named Andreas Vesalius published De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body. And it was based not on inherited classical authority, not on apes, not on tradition, but on Vesalius himself rolling up his sleeves and dissecting actual human cadavers. What he found was that Galen, the unchallenged anatomical authority for 13 centuries, was wrong in over 200 specific, documented, illustrated instances. Bones that Galen placed in the wrong position, organs with the wrong structure, blood vessels that simply did not exist in humans the way Galen described them. Because Galen had never dissected a human being, the anatomical foundation of European medicine, for more than 1,000 years, had been built almost entirely on the study of Barbary apes. And because no one questioned it and went unchallenged until a man in his late 20s simply decided to check. 85 years later, in 1628, William Harvey published proof that blood circulates continuously through the body in a closed loop, pumped by the heart in one direction, through arteries, returning through veins, constantly, rhythmically, without end. Not pooling, not being consumed by organs and replenished by the liver, as Galen had taught, circulating. With Vesalius and Harvey, the body had finally been looked at as it actually was, not as tradition says it should be, and medicine would never be the same. Next, how germs rewrote medical history.